Ma'am, if Devansh sir is okay, we can start.
Yes, Shivani, we have around 25 participants right now, so you may start the session.
Okay, thank you, sir. I hope I'm clear to everybody. My voice,
Yes.
is it clear?
Yes. Yeah, audible.
A hearty good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of our TISS Azim Premji School of Education, I welcome you all to Conversations. Today's webinar is the first one in a weekly series on National Education Policy 2020. The topic for today's discussion is Implications of NEP 2020 for Early Childhood Care and Education. To present her relevant views on this topic, we have amongst us Professor Rekha Sharma Sen as our esteemed and learned speaker. Professor Rekha Sharma Sen is Faculty of Child Development in the School of Continuing Education at the Indira Gandhi National Open University in New Delhi. Professor Sen's expertise is in the area of early childhood care and education, including for children with disability. She's worked extensively with the Government of India, the World Bank, and various institutes of national and international importance. We welcome you, ma'am. Today's talk will critically analyze provisions for ECC in the NEP 2020, focusing on delivery channels, curriculum, teacher preparation, monitoring, and regulation. Now I request Professor Rekha to take the stage.
Thanks, Shivani. The phone call came and I just remembered that I ought to have put it on silent, which is what I'm sort of just doing right now. Yeah. Okay. So I'm really grateful to Rekha to invite me to make this presentation. And as she said, it's the very first presentation in this series on NEP. And I said, you honor me too much by making me the first presenter. So I'm really grateful to TISS and Azim Premji School of Education. As you said, it would be conversations, so I have kept it in that conversation style. I really haven't got a PPT, and I suppose I am expected to sort of say my views for about half an hour and then question answers for about an hour. Is that okay, or should we make it 45 minutes and sort of make it equal, 45 minutes of presentation and 45 minutes of questioning, which way you would like it to be? I'm okay, whichever way you suggest. You'd like me to stick with half an hour of presentation?
Yeah, that would be good, Rekha. Let's have people come in and then you could elaborate.
Fine. So at the outset, what does the NEP hold for ECCE? Let us begin with the positives. What are the what are the positive features of the NEP? And of course, as all the newspaper reports and so many other things are saying, it is the inclusion of ECC formally into a policy. So here, what I would just like to emphasize that this is not the first time that ECC has found a mention. In a way, it's a bit of a continuation of the earlier 1986 policy. The 1986 policy included a clear section on ECCE, and it had mentioned at that time that ECC services would be strengthened both in their own right and as a, to serve as a feeder into the primary education. And I remember I was in college at that time, and there was much jubilation in our sector. All our senior teachers and senior colleagues who had been working, they were really very jubilant that ECC has found the place that it deserves. So in that sense, including ECC now, in that sense, is a continuity. As well as, given the research world over, really no government can afford to neglect ECCE. So in that sense, it's a very, the inclusion, so to say, comes not as a surprise. But what's the positive or the new thing in this policy as compared to the earlier one is that ECC has been integrated into the school education, and the years of ECC as the foundational stage are being conceptualized from up to the class 2, up to 8 years. So that's a very big gain. because this is something which at least we in the ECC sector have been talking about, that there is much more that the child in the early primary grades has in common with the preschool child than with the child in class 3, 4 and 5. And the characteristics, the thinking characteristics, the cognitive socio-emotional characteristics of the children are much more similar. And also,
if I could interrupt, can you, we can't hear you too clearly. There's some background noise.
okay, what I do is switch off my video. There is actually no noise, not even the AC is on. I'll just switch off my video. It could be the bandwidth problem. So if you don't, let's try with my switching off the video.
All right.
Yeah.
Still have the sound.
Yeah. So, and I suppose everybody is on mute. If somebody has their videos on, if they can, sort of put them off, then that may help everyone. Is it a bit better now, Rekha? I have also come a bit closer to the computer and I'm talking a bit more loudly.
Yeah,
Then the problem is
problem is, Devansh, can you suggest what's to be done?
Ma'am, is there any like headset or something which ma'am can use?
I usually do not use a headset, okay, but I'll try. Usually we sort of do it this way, but yes, okay. So just give me a minute, I'll get it, okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, fine. Then that's the way I'll speak. Okay, so I'll just sort of repeat my point, which I said. I'm not sure whether people got it in the first time when I said. So I mentioned that
See you, Rekha. Sorry.
Yeah, can you hear now?
We can hear you. We'd like to see you as well.
Oh, okay, well, if there's a problem in the voice, then just let me know. Okay, so I'm just repeating briefly my point that the inclusion of the ECCE into the policy is in a way a continuation of what was already there in the 1986 policy. But the new point is that it has been included as a part of the foundational years, and the foundational years are being considered up to class 2. Because we do hold, in the sector, we do hold that the child in the early primary grades has much more in common with the child in the preschool age rather than the classes 3, 4 and 5. And also the play-based methodology, etc. should be followed in class 1 and 2. So in that sense, this is a gain. Though of course also I must mention that for the first time this point about treating the early childhood and class 1 and 2 together was suggested in the 12th 5-year plan. So in that sense, it was a suggestion which had already been around for some time, but nonetheless that it has found a mention over here is a very good thing. When we say this, the other positive about including over here is the importance which has been given. The births to 3 years has also been acknowledged. There is a mention of it in the policy, so that's a very good thing, because otherwise typically we tend to think that we are talking about education and birth to 3 is not formally in a school, so do we need to mention them? So the fact that they are mentioned is an acknowledgement that there is a recognition that learning begins at birth and it's not only confined to the 4 walls of the school. So with that, when we see the curriculum, the articulation of the curriculum, in specifically in point number 1.2, one finds that the articulation of the ECC curriculum is not, so to say, technically sound. A curriculum includes goals, then it would talk about methods and pedagogies, and then it would talk about the materials in that sequence. But what we find here is that, everything has been juxtaposed together. So the content which is to be taught in terms of the skills and abilities and concepts you want the child to learn is juxtaposed with the materials, which is juxtaposed with the methods. So in that sense, it gives a very not a very technically sound feeling. It gives that somebody is not really taken the pains to see what is the ECC curricular framework. Whereas the ECC curricular framework at an international and even national level is very clearly articulated for the births to 3 separately and for the 3 to 6s as separately. So if I sort of just sort of read out from what the policy says, it says ECC ideally consists of flexible, multifaceted, multi-level, play-based, activity-based, and inquiry-based learning, so which is all quite good. But the next sentences goes on to comprising of alphabets, languages, numbers, counting. It's right, all those formal methods of teaching and the formal expectations of a child, which actually we in the sector sort of say should be the things which you expect towards the end of the preschool years. Whereas over here, the curriculum starts with a description of a very formalized ECC curriculum in terms of alphabet, numbers, counting, and then it goes on to colors and shapes, which are concepts, and then it goes on to indoor and outdoor play, which is a method, and then it goes on to puzzles, which is materials, and it comes back to logical thinking, which is content or concept once again, which you want the child to learn. Then it goes on to drawing and painting, which are activities, and like that. So in that sense, there isn't really a technically sound articulation of the ECC curriculum at all. And this is the only paragraph which is devoted to it. Then even so, in the next paragraph, there is a mention that the 0 to 3 would have a separate curricular framework, whereas the 3 to 6 would have a different one drawn up by NCERT. But a reference could have been made to what is already the state of the art, in this context. And I'm also a member of the Alliance for Right to Early Childhood Education, which is a voluntary body which sort of works to further the rights of the child. And when the earlier bigger draft had come up, the 400-page draft, we had submitted our submissions and given a clear, if you remember at that time, the point was that you could suggest a sentence by sentence change that you want. So we had actually articulated the exact sentences which we would have liked to see in terms of how to define an ECC curriculum. But we do not find their inclusion. And in fact, this paragraph, in a way, remains quite the same as it was in the 400-page plus draft. Also for the under 3s, the birth to 3, the section 1.3, it does mention that the framework will serve as a guide both for parents and for early childhood care and education institutions. Now, interestingly, I was in a webinar, at one point of time, and the policy and the statements articulated mean different things to people when they come with different backgrounds. So, on the one hand, whereas we in the sector, so to say, are very happy that the under 3s have found an inclusion in the policy, people with who are not really engaged with this discussion on a day-to-day basis were horrified that now are we going to bring the under 3s into the school system, and now are we going to have a curriculum for the under 3s, and are they going to be into the formal system? So a bit more explication of what do we mean by a curricular framework for the under 3s. How is it to be operationalized? Whom would it be meant for? Is it meant for the children, or is it meant for the parents, or is it meant for the people working in childcare institutions or creches? That sort of an explication over here would have helped and would not have caused the sort of confusions that there are. This was about inclusion of the ECCE. I move to the next point about the age. What are the ages at which we have talked about? What is the age of entry to class 1? When does preschooling end and when does class 1 begin? So many of us have felt upset about the fact that the right to education has not been extended both to cover the 3 to 6 and upwards to include children beyond 14. There are, of course, all the legal implications of not having included children in the right to education. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about it from the point of view of entry to class 1. Given that we do not have a uniform entry to class 1 across the country, in 23 states it happens to be at 5 plus, and in the rest of the states it happens to be at 6 plus. One was looking for a uniform, explicit articulation of what exactly is the preschool age and when exactly does class 1 begin. Because the difficulty comes that when we are ambiguous and when we leave it at 5 plus and 6 plus, you have difficulty in defining learning outcomes. Who is the child you ought to keep in mind when you are planning the learning outcomes at the end of preschool age? Because having participated in such an exercise at the NCRT about a year or more than a year ago, 2 years ago probably, we were pretty confused. We didn't know whom to keep in mind. Should it be a 5-year-old? Should it be a 6-year-old? And 1 year makes a lot of difference. It makes a lot of difference anytime, but it makes a large amount of difference in the early years. And in any case, given the cutoff entry that we have for children, be it 30th March or 30th September or 30th December, whatever is the cutoff that we keep, we know that in any case, there is a difference of 1 full year in the child who are in a particular class. So if you were 29th April, you come into the classroom this year, whereas if you were 1st May, you go into the classroom next year. So in any case, in a class...
Ma'am,
yeah.
Professor, can you speak a little bit louder? I think a lot of us can't hear you. People are saying it in the chat box.
Oh, I am not seeing the chat, so maybe I'm sorry. Yeah, so I don't know since when are people been saying that. I'll try to sort of say those things again. Has it been
the last 7-8 minutes or so?
Well, okay, maybe those things can be taken up in the question session. So what I had completed saying was, that the fact that the RTE has not been extended either to include the 3 to 6 year olds or the older children. The legal fallout of it are all there. But what I am concentrating on is that the fallout in terms of not having a uniform age for entry into class 1. So if in about 23 of our states, the entry into class 1 is at 5 plus, and in the remaining it is at 6 plus. The difficulty that happens is that the children, it's very difficult to define the learning outcomes. When you are deciding the learning outcomes at the end of preschool stage, who's the child you should have in mind? Should it be the 5 plus or the 6 plus child? And because even 1 year makes a difference at any time, but when it is the youngest children, that 1 year makes a whole lot of a difference. And so if across 60% of the country, children will be going into class 1 at 5 plus, and in the rest of the country it would be going in at 6 plus. It's very difficult to have those expectations from children. So had we adopted the RTE, apart from the aspect of the fundamental right being extended to preschool children, it could have also served to make uniform the age of entry into class 1. So that's one of the aspects which I feel is lacking and where we will have difficulty in this. I move on now to the number of years of provision for ECCE. So one assumes that because it is saying that the policy is from is for children from 3 years onwards. So wherever there would be a 5 plus entry into class 1, there would be 2 years of preschooling. Wherever there would be 6 plus entry into class 1, there would be 3 years of schooling. And somewhere further in the document, the policy says, I think it is section 6.2 somewhere, where it says that efforts will be made to have at least 1 year of preschool education in the Kendriya Vidyalayas. So once again, we are giving a multiplicity of options. It could be 2 plus, it could be 3 plus, it could be 1 plus. So when we are talking in this way, then when we talk about equity, then that becomes questionable. Ideally, 3 years of preschool education and entry into class 1 at 6 plus is ideal. That would be the best. But when that's not happening, when at different points or different points the policy states sort of different expectations from the system, or the uniformity is not maintained, then equity comes into question. Children will not get that many years of preschool education, and that becomes a point. Also, this if I see section number 1.4, there is this whole articulation of a preparatory class. Shivani, is my audio okay now? Are you all able to hear?
Ma'am, it's much better, but some people are still facing the disturbance. Oh, the disturbance just went away. I can hear you quite clearly.
It could
Hello?
be their issue, could it not? I mean, I really
Ma'am,
don't.
I requested them to use earphones.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, ma'am, is it possible that you can keep the mic a little closer to your mouth? Is it possible?
My headset doesn't have a
Okay, does
mic.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I'm very, very near to the computer, and I'm speaking, according to me, pretty loud. I'll try to be louder. I have a feeling if people shut off
Sorry
their...
for talking. Sorry for talking
Sorry
in
to
between. The
disturb
voice
you,
is
but
actually clear, but there is some disturbance noise which we can hear. That is the problem. The voice is pretty much clear and it is loud enough. There is some disturbance noise at the back. I don't know, some disturbance noise. That's the problem.
I can only switch off my fan now. That's the only thing I can do, because even the AC is not working. Let me try that for a minute if that helps you all. So just give me a minute.
Meanwhile, I request you all to use earphones, because to me it's clear. Not I can hear the disturbance, but it's quite clear to me. So if you all can use earphones, meanwhile.
I think it's also, if you keep your own videos on, then that's going to be a problem. I do use actually Google Meet more than I use Zoom, but I really haven't had too much of a problem, but I'll try nonetheless. And I'm now keeping my video off. That might help you all as well.
no, Rekha, there's no issue with the video, either yours or other people's videos being on. I think it's some static in the background. There's not much you can do about it. The fan may have been causing it, but if even that is not the cause, we can't quite place what it is. So I think you can turn on your video and go ahead. We'll just have to concentrate better.
Yeah, let's try for a few minutes without the video, because now even the fan is shut and we'll know which way it
There's
goes.
still the static, yeah. I don't think you can do away with that static sound.
Fine, then I'm really sorry. I haven't faced this earlier, so I don't really know why it's happening. Also, because probably I use Google Meet rather than Zoom, so if it's got to do something with the
It's
Zoom.
absolutely fine, ma'am. No issues. I think we can just carry on.
Yeah, go ahead, Rekha.
So I move to the next point, or rather, I continue with my point on equity. You see, if you see the next section, I think it is 1.5 and 1.6, where we talk about the delivery provisions. You know, how the service provisions it's going to be. So four methods of service provision have been outlined through the Anganwadis, through the co-located Anganwadis, and through pre-primary sections, and through standalone. So this actually is a description of what is. You know, this is exactly how preschool education is being provided right now. So it's not as if any new models have been suggested. This is what is the status quo at present, and that has been articulated. Now the issue is that this status quo once again infringes on this whole aspect of equity, because service provision in the Anganwadis and in private preschools and in pre-primary sections of schools is not same. In fact, in all of these three, it's quite different. By and large, barring a few schools, it's really not of appropriate quality. The reasons for lack of appropriate quality may be different. In the Anganwadi, the program is minimalistic. In the private preschools, a lot of them focus on formal reading and writing to the exclusion of play, which is once again not appropriate. And there are only, if you were to do a sort of a study, you barely get about 10 to 20% of schools which are following appropriate pedagogy. So, in that sense, the problem about equity that comes about here is that the teacher qualifications in each of these settings is different. The teacher qualifications in the Anganwadi settings are different. In the government or recognized private schools are different, and in standalone private preschools they are different. And when the teacher qualifications are different, then equity once again becomes questionable. So really no particular model, so to say, has been adopted as maybe the dominant model to provide preschool education. All models are there without substantially clarifying how equity would be maintained in all of these models. And teacher preparation is one of the integral aspects of maintaining equity. Also the workload of the teacher or the worker. So because the Anganwadi worker is still called the worker, the ECC section has been written with worker slash teacher. That's how the Anganwadi worker has been spoken about, in the ECC section. That's how the Anganwadi worker and the teacher. So we are assuming that both would be there, which means that we are assuming that there is a difference between them, and it will perhaps continue to remain to be so. In which case, once again, whether everybody would get ECC of equitable quality becomes a question mark. So not enough has been articulated about this. There is a lot of diversity in the country. Maybe one model doesn't hold. Maybe you need to give several models. But we do feel, and once again, I'm not saying this as my individual opinion, I'm saying it on behalf of being a member of the Alliance for Early Childhood Development, wherein in our submission to the earlier big draft, the 400-page draft, we had suggested that a dominant model of attaching the pre-primary to the primary schools could be adopted. And wherever this was not possible to be done so, the secondary model of having the pre-primary within the Anganwadi system could continue, but with identifying or sort of recruiting another Anganwadi worker specifically dedicated to the task of preschool education. So once again, that's not an articulation that has found its way into the policy. It's an articulation which people from the sector have made repeatedly in order to improve the quality of preschool education in the Anganwadi. But we do not find it having been included over here. So that puts, the same lacunae which the Anganwadi system faces presently would continue to remain because we have not addressed this adequately. Maybe the plan of implementation would address it, we do not know, but there could be some indication of, that it would be addressed. Something like that could be there. Because once you move into the teacher preparation section, you find that teacher preparation has been articulated with quite a few variations in the basic model of a 4-year program. The 4-year B.Ed has been articulated as the, almost the singular model for teacher preparation across all stages. And there are also the variations have been suggested that people who do graduation could then do a 1-year B.Ed, or those who have done a 2-year B.Ed is also suggested. So a lot of thought has been given to teacher preparation at the senior stages, and for the pre-primary also it's expected that they would follow into the 4-year, the 4-year B.Ed would become the norm. Our 2 or 3 areas of concern over here are the following. That even as of now, the situation which exists now, teacher preparation is seen by the NCTE, and the NCTE lays out curricula. Presently, the teacher education curricula requires the person to do a 2-year diploma after +2. And the recognized teacher training institutions which can offer such a diploma are certified by the NCTE. As of date, 15 states do not have a recognized teacher training institute in the area of ECCE. There are 15 states without a NCTE recognized teacher training institution, even now. And as per my information, which I could gather from the 2016 annual report of the NCTE, the total yearly turnout from these whatever institutions there are is about 5 to 6,000 students every year. So every year you have about 5 to 6,000 students available who have the requisite qualifications as per the NCTE. Now, if in all these years, and this program of the NCTE, the 2-year diploma program after +2 is an age-old program. It's been coming for a very, very long time. Some or the other modification happens to it, but it's been there from the very start. So if we haven't been able to really sort of make this program itself universal in as many years, to think of, that we would be able to universalize a 4-year B.Ed program in ECCE by 2030, to me seems to be ambitious. It's a good idea, it is the gold standard, but some mapping about what we are to do in the interim could have been articulated. Also, the whole aspect of that, what do the people do who are already just now in service and have no qualifications? How can they do? Could shorter duration programs which are already there, people are offering, various institutes are offering a 2-year or even a 1-year program. Could they have been recognized in the meantime? What if somebody doesn't really want to teach the entire foundational stage, wants to just confine herself to the preschool years, doesn't really want to go in for class 1 and 2, probably doesn't need a 4-year diploma, so a 4-year B.Ed program. So a singular model of teacher preparation for the ECC stage perhaps overlooks the specific needs of the sector. I'm not saying that it is not desirable, it is highly desirable. But given the fact that we need so many people and we need them right away, given the fact that many people are already working without training, given the fact that people are worried that what will happen to my qualification which I have right now by 2030, I'm getting those sort of queries from many. Yeah.
Hello. We have 5 minutes.
Yes, I can hear.
For the discussion.
Yeah,
yes,
that's fine.
You
can tell me. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So, so once again, we feel that maybe a layered approach to teacher education could have been proposed, keeping the gold standard as 4-year B.Ed program, but people wanting to specialize, for some parts of the foundation stage and not all stages, people who already have some earlier learning and experience, how do they get into the system? That sort of an articulation is missing over here. I come now to the aspect of children with disabilities. Children with disabilities, typically one expects to find them with a specific mention in a specific chapter with, titled as children with special needs. I think this was the case when the 400-page draft was there. Now the children with disabilities are included in the socially and economically disadvantaged groups, which is okay and not okay, because all children with disabilities do not fall into the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So people not familiar that, this is where we need to look for, this is where the children with special needs, children with disabilities have been talked about, may tend to overlook it. But apart from this one minor point, I think the 4 or 5 paragraphs which have been devoted to children with special needs children with disabilities are quite well articulated. There seems to be theoretical integrity in the articulation of those five paragraphs. In fact, even the RPWD Act 2016 has been mentioned, the rights of persons with disability, which is a very good thing. Whereas if you see in case of the ECC chapter, there is no mention of the ECC policy, which was out in 2013, the curriculum framework, which was out in 14, and the quality standards, which were also out in 14. So in that sense, the entire conceptualization of the inclusion in the whole aspect of inclusion of children with disabilities right from the very beginning into the education system has been very lucidly and very nicely laid out, with also the provision of the need for special educators to serve within the general education system. So that's a very clear articulation, including the articulation of the barrier-free environment, including the articulation for multidisciplinary teams to be providing services to children in the very early childhood years. The same clarity, if it was also evident in the ECC section, many of the ambiguities which many of us are feeling and which the lay people are perhaps feeling all the more could have been avoided. Shivani, I think I'll stop here. Maybe people could ask on these points or any other points which I may not have touched upon, for example, regulation and accreditation. So, and I just hope that the audio is reachable, otherwise it will be a waste for you all, and I'm very sorry about that.
Audio is usually improved later, so I think we can open it up. I'm not sure if Shivani has had, I mean, there's some connectivity issue. I don't see her here, but yes, we can open up your presentation for discussion now. So, are there any comments or questions?
Hello, so ma'am, Shivani had a current cut at her place, so I'll take over from here.
Sure, Yukta.
Yeah, so ma'am, there are a few questions in the chat. Can I just read them from for you?
Yeah, I'm also trying to read, but you read, please.
Okay. Whoever put them up can read them out or ask them, Yukta.
Okay, Bhau Gavande, can you please read your question and ma'am can discuss over it?
Ma'am, policy says each stage has the same importance, including ECC, and the teacher will have to complete 4-year degree to teach each stage. But at the same time, it also says that the workers who are working in Anganwadis and other ECC center, 10+2 qualification, they will have to undergo 6 months training. And with lower qualification, we'll have to undergo 1 year's course. Is it not contradicting itself?
Yeah, absolutely. You have raised a very, very valid point, and you've really sort of read it very well. That's exactly the point about equity. So, that's even if presently the Anganwadi worker is a 10th class, that's the minimum requirement. Of course, now with everybody getting more educated, there are many Anganwadi workers who have a higher educational qualification. But the Anganwadi workers training has over the years been reduced. At one point of time when I was in college, it used to be a 9-month training. Somewhere down when I began working, and somewhere, about 20 years ago, it was a 3-month training. Now it's a 26-day training only, with only 4 days devoted to ECCE. So quite truly, therein lies the whole equity issue. So perhaps if the government if the policy could have articulated that what is the basis on which we are going to recruit new Anganwadi workers, it could have perhaps articulated some standard, some qualification for recruitment of new Anganwadi workers. Maybe that could have been a 2-year diploma after 10+2, because the 4-year B.Ed is a very ambitious thing. So in the absence of that, your concern is absolutely valid. And to keep training and retraining the Anganwadi workers, fine, that's already being done. The good point and the point which you read out is that they are actually thinking now of a 6-month or a 1-year course. But I do not see why it should be tied up with the person's original qualification. Whether you are 10th or whether you are 12th, it doesn't really affect how you deliver ECCE. And the Anganwadi workers all are at a particular stage of maturity. So I do not see any point of differentiating a teacher education, this training program for them on the basis of their earlier qualification. I don't see that to be useful at all. So that's where the equity concern, that the policy is not unambiguous in saying where the children will be. And the children attending the Anganwadis will be from the SEDG groups. They are the ones who will be attending Anganwadis, the most marginalized. In fact, in one of the studies when I did, the minute parents have some income, they send the boys to the private school, even though the private school is not doing a great job. But in parents' estimation, it's doing a great job. So parents send the boy to the private school and the girl to the Anganwadi. So you even have the gender disparity. And so therefore, the children who need ECC most are the ones who are going to the Anganwadis, and probably for them, the quality will be the most compromised. Because quality is, yeah.
Go on, Rekha, sorry.
Yeah, because I was just going to say that quality is not simply a matter of improving the physical infrastructure. The policy could say that we are saying that the physical infrastructure of the Anganwadis would be improved and all of that. But of course, physical infrastructure is important, but it is not the only thing. So it depends on how much, when I spoke about the dominant and the secondary model, this must also not be taken to assume that all Anganwadi centers are not functioning appropriately. That should not be the message that I am giving. In fact, what we propose as the Alliance, that do decentralized planning. Especially about 3 years ago, I had a chance to visit Chhattisgarh, and I actually saw the Anganwadis over there, and the effort that had been put in by the Ministry of Women and Child Development to improve the preschool education component of the Anganwadis. And it was a terrific effort. So perhaps if I was in the state of Chhattisgarh, being in the Anganwadi remains a very good idea. The curriculum is there, the place is there, the training is there. But perhaps if you see the Anganwadi centers which are there in many of the urban slums, they are really not places for young children. They are small, very, very small centers. Maybe if you walk both ways, you could cover it in maybe 10 steps this way and 15 steps that way. And there are no toilet facilities. The equipments, etc., are very less. There is no place for the indoor and outdoor. So there is really no uniform parameter. In places where the primary school is far away, Anganwadi would be the best option. But would we be doing decentralized planning at such block level? Are we going to be doing it? Are we really going to be seeing what serves this block the best? Is the Anganwadi the best answer over here? Or is a preschool section in the government primary school the best answer over here? There seems to be, to me, probably that may come up in the implementation plan. But right now, there is not too much of clarity over here. And whatever little interaction or presentations I have seen on the web by a few states, most are going towards the aspect of strengthening the Anganwadi system. But none of those presentations make a mention of a dedicated Anganwadi worker. So which means that the same Anganwadi worker who's providing the other services would continue to provide preschool education. This is also not to denounce the Anganwadi worker, because it is really not her fault if preschool education doesn't get transacted properly. She needs a lot of support. And in the present COVID situation, the Anganwadi workers have been the people, they have been the face of the public support system to the families. So it's really a matter of thinking through right from the top and envisaging what works where, and really going full out in providing quality early childhood care and education whatever it takes in that particular context.
There's a question from Ritesh, Rekha, and also a couple of questions in the chat box. So Ritesh
Yeah,
will
I'm
come.
trying to see.
May I ask? Hi, Rekha. Yeah,
Hi Ritesh, how are you?
after
My
long.
teacher.
I just wanted to know about this, Rekha. Maybe perhaps I'm reading too much into the lines. You know, this point 1.8 talks about, sorry, 1.7 talks about the cluster resource centers of school education to be mentoring the Anganwadi teachers as an interim arrangement until the point a formal curricular structure is in place and professional development pans out. Now, there are two questions that I would like to raise over here. I mean, see, if we look at the larger historical structure, we see that, you know, the school is largely seen as a preparation to higher education, you know, in the way the examinations are conducted, in the way the activities or the curricular design is being mapped onto. Now, with this idea of preparatory stage of 5 years, do you think it is, you know, reinforcing the idea of a preparation towards the schooling or the formal setting? You know, and I was thinking in terms of two things. One is, what is the larger imagination of these 5 years of engagement through the preparatory stage? And second, is it directed towards moving into primary stage? Because at 3 years, they are saying that there will be an examination that would be conducted. So my worry comes from there, you know. So if you could please address.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ritesh. That's what I'm saying. That the policy read by different people with different, background or with different conceptualization does mean different things. So, as I'm saying, within the sector, we were very happy that this idea of 5 years of foundational stage has come up because we felt that the methods and methodology of early childhood education will find its way into classes 1 and 2. But I have attended webinars where people are expressing the same fear that you are expressing, that will it mean schoolification of preschool education.
Right. Yeah.
And given our propensity to schoolify everything, this fear is real. So I think the guards also have to be us, we ourselves, and therefore I would like to link it up with accreditation and monitoring, and also with the foundational literacy and numeracy mission. You see, when we see, the feeling is that the policy is not sort of taking an integrated view. It could also be that like a chapter of ECC has been put as the first chapter because, as I said, you cannot today bring out a document in education without acknowledging ECC. It just shows a lack of your own understanding, a gap in your own understanding. So see, the foundational literacy and numeracy mission is talking about class 1 onwards. It's not talking about early literacy, which from whatever learning I have had, begins right even in the first year of life when children are in literate environments. So why is the whole aspect of foundational literacy and numeracy? So ECC has not been integrated over there. And when we look at the accreditation and regulation aspect, the emphasis is on self-disclosure. So self-disclosure can be of concrete elements. I mean, we can have difference of opinion over there also. Should it be all self-disclosure? But I'm not even going into that. I'm accepting self-disclosure because that is the more moral or ethical aspect we all should move towards. We shouldn't need people to monitor us. But accreditation and monitoring has to do beyond monitoring the physical or the monetary aspects of the school. Accreditation and monitoring has to be also of the teaching processes. Now, how will the self-disclosure work over there? If I do not know how to impart early literacy, how am I going to evaluate myself? I think I am doing a great job of teaching ABC right in the nursery. I have no idea how to teach. So I think I'm on the right path if children are recounting 1 to 20 and writing numbers 1 to 20. So where is the supervisory element for monitoring of the teaching processes? It need not be punitive. There is some mention of the SSA which will lay out guidelines, but fine. So guidelines are laid out, but I don't even understand the guidelines. I do not know. And I think one thing which can probably revolutionize early childhood care and education today is sound teacher training on early literacy and numeracy. If that happens, even your class 1 and 2 outcomes will improve, and whatever outcomes of reading and writing you want at the end of stage 3, class 3, they would improve. But if the policy does not even talk about early literacy and numeracy in the years before 6, in class before 1, then we can see that there is not a connect. And what then people will do by their own way could probably be schoolification of preschool education, which would be hugely unfortunate.
Thank you.
There is a question in chat by Priyanka Tamhankar. She wants you to repeat the section number for the children with disabilities point.
Yeah, so I think it's section number, it's in the 6th section. It is, wait, let me see. Yeah, so it is from section 6.10 onwards, and it's the next 4 or 5 points. Somebody said, I think, how has written that there are several departments involved: HRD, WCD, Family Welfare, Adivasi. How will it work out at this stage? Yeah, so you're quite right. Actually, the ECC before the policy was there has been the under the WCD department, and there is a ministry at the central level, and the WCD departments at state levels. And since 2013, with this whole lot of criticism about ICDS and Anganwadis not delivering proper preschool education, a lot of restructuring of the preschool education curriculum in the ICDS, in the Anganwadis, has been taking place. People have developed, many states have developed curricula, many people are already doing the training. And yet, when you participate in seminars or in meetings or workshops which are organized by the education department in a state or at the national level, you really do find that there is a sort of wanting to do things afresh. So that would be a huge waste actually. There is a need for convergence because work that has already been done, curricula which have already been devised, could be used by the education departments of states. The reason why children would be better off if they come under the education departments is because they would be part of proper school structures with proper physical facilities, with teachers who would have had a certain level of training. That would be the advantage. Also, very interestingly, in a particular study done by the Ambedkar University, they found that the school readiness scores of children who were part of the larger school system, preschool children attending preschool, where the preschool is a part of the larger school system, their school readiness scores were better off than children who were in independent school systems, independent preschools or Anganwadis. So there is something to be had, there is something to be gained, even if it is within the context of socio-emotional or other competencies which the child acquires once the child is within a larger system. So that remains the positive of having the child within the education, within the purview of the education. But that does not mean that all that has been done in terms of curriculum development, etc., is not taken cognizance of. It should not become a case of reinventing of the wheel. it should not become a case of parallel work, which it sometimes tends to become.
If there are any more questions, please ask. We still have time.
There is a question about huge challenge. I mean, I don't know, that's probably a response to something I said. So I do not know in what context that was. A huge challenge considering the diversity in our country. Does the curriculum cater to socio-cultural backgrounds of students? In ECCE, the socio-cultural background of students impacts in two ways. It would impact in terms of the language used. And I think over there, the policy is very clear in saying that mother tongue needs to be used. There are a lot of questions which people talk about, how will a teacher cater to the, different languages which are there in the classroom. So once again, I think such questions or such concerns come when we really do not properly understand what really is the mother tongue based multilingual education. It doesn't require the teacher to know all languages. It requires the teacher to be sensitive to the use of multiple languages by the children. So once again, if the mother tongue based multilingual education forms a component of teacher training, even right now when we are talking about refresher trainings or whatever, I feel that dedicated modules on early literacy and early numeracy for ECC, cadres, whether it be teachers or whether it be Anganwadi workers, because Anganwadi workers are there right now. So that would help. So that is one aspect of the socio-cultural background. The second aspect of socio-cultural background in context of ECCE has to do with themes of transaction. What is the content you use for transaction? And that content, typically in the ECC context, we say it should be according to the local context of the child. So a lot of this reinventing of the curriculum that has happened, which I'm talking about at the level of the Ministry of Women and Child Development or the departments in the various states, they have taken the local contexts into account and the themes of the festivals, of the songs, cassettes of local songs, cassettes of local stories, books of local stories have been collected. But once again, this is the hardware. What you need training on is how these local songs and stories are going to be used in the service of early literacy and early numeracy. That's a part which is lacking. I think even in teacher education, even if you say that teachers in the schools are there with proper qualifications, by proper I mean in today's time, just now they are 2-year diploma with 10 after 10+2. Even those teachers don't really have an understanding of early literacy and numeracy. So with regard to early literacy and numeracy, I would say everybody is on the same page, be it Anganwadi worker or be it the government school teacher. There is really no difference. So you would really need to step that up if we really want, socio-cultural backgrounds to be taken up. But by and large, the sector of ECCE takes the social cultural background into consideration when formulating the curriculum. So that should not be a problem.
Ma'am, there's a hand raised from Jayashree Mukherjee. I request ma'am to please unmute yourself. Jayashree ma'am.
Good evening, Rekha ma'am.
So,
Ma'am, I had this, you just talked about using mother tongue to teach, right? At the same time, we all are aware that there is this huge emphasis on English education, correct? We want to, I mean, even like I'm from Bangalore, I have seen even people, they don't want to send their children to the government schools or even to the Anganwadis because they would rather send them to a local missionary school just because it's got that saint tag there and they feel that they will teach them English. So irrespective of whatever, whatever we use in terms of like what you talked about using, the local stories, the local art forms, the local songs, folklore, anything, there is this undue attention being given to English. The parents are very happy if they, to such an extent that they even have, they even ape, like they get a birthday cake, they have to sing the birthday song. So I see that there is a lot of stress on that. So, I mean, I agree with what you say that, the mother tongue and the flavors of the local areas, but when we have a curriculum, what I have noticed is that most schools, especially for those, early education setups, which is a part of a bigger school, they are very convenient making them into feeders for for the bigger school. So I think that's compromise. You end up with the same old thing, A for apple and B for boy, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, you're right, and I think this problem or this phenomenon is more there in the urban areas. There is, see, even if you see the ECC policy doesn't say don't introduce English. It acknowledges that children can learn many languages. The point about it is that introducing it in a meaningful way. The difficulty is not that we want to introduce English to children. You can do that, provided you can do that in a meaningful way and you know how to introduce it in a meaningful way. The one difficulty with high-end preschools, where sometimes when you conduct training sessions for the high-end preschool, you find that the type of difficulty that comes over there is that they just don't let the young child articulate in any other language than English. So that is one sort of problem. That's one end of the spectrum where the high-end preschools won't let the child talk, or they would at least only talk in English. So that's where you need sensitization and explanation. I don't think there is any shortcut to teacher training and sensitization on that aspect. Whereas on the other hand, you have the phenomena of the, even the Anganwadis or even the low-cost private schools thinking that memorization of ABC is going to be the be-all and end-all of English education, and this is where it's going to bring us to. So I think too much of our stance as educators has to be how we sort of understand parental aspiration, but also infuse the teaching pedagogies which we want without unduly getting upset by what the parents are wanting. So you keep that whole idea that yes, parent is going to ask for English education. That's what seems to have paid off. No, everyone. We are even, everybody seems to have benefited because they've had English education. So instead of feeling frustrated by this aspiration of the parent, if we take that into account, but also explain, and this would need to be done at a micro level through your various training programs, which we all do at our own level, and it does make a difference. How clearly you are able to explain the benefits of multilingual, mother tongue based multilingual education. The people are able to see the difference, and then of course it's a matter of how much is the school authority willing to allow that change. So a lot of sensitization has to happen at the school authority level rather than at the teacher level. Because there are, in the training programs, teachers even say, we want to talk to the child in Hindi. I'm talking about the upper end preschools, but we are not allowed to. So that aspect is also there. So, this needs discussions and talk with the principals, etc. Any change is slow to come about. But I think what's important is that as educationists, at least, as teacher educators, we all need to be on the common page. And when the policy has a gap like not including ECC in foundational literacy and numeracy, then how do we say that we are on the common page? That's what I'm trying to say. On the other hand, the policy has also taken I would say, an affirmative stand about English. And there is one line, I thought that line was very nice. That line says that a language does not have to be the medium of instruction for it to be taught well. I thought this was a lovely line. And this meant that you do not have to have an English medium school in order for children to learn English. So they can learn English even if a lot of your transaction is in another language. So the point is that how we capitalize on these, how we sort of take the movement forward, how we move forward.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, there is a question in the chat by Manisha Mirajkar. It says she's saying that until the 4-year B.Ed course starts, will the postgraduate ECCE course be valid, which is conducted by educational institutes?
I'm asking you the same question. My students are asking me the same question. I get so many emails. And also another, I mean, so there is a pathway, you know, the gold standard has been put out, but what happens to all of us in the interim period? Will everybody be able to be achieving the gold standard? Does everybody want to? Could there not be levels created? I think the gold standard is a good idea. It has been brought in with the understanding that if everybody has the same qualification and if the remuneration, etc., promotion standards remain the same, people will not like to shift from one area of education, one stage of education to another. I think that's brilliant. But along with that, concomitantly, what we do need to also keep in mind is that everybody may not have the ability to invest in a 4-year teacher training. So could a layered thing have been included? And yes, if I have some diploma now before how or whatever degree or a postgraduate or an undergraduate or a 10+2, how will that pan out by the time it is 2030? Will there be some recognition of prior learning? What will I be asked to do? Will I have to do something again? So that anxiety is very much there. I agree with you. Also, if I'm permitted, Shivani, if I would just like to add on over here, one aspect which I find that, you know, once again as teacher educators, the open and distance learning system has been talked about in the policy, but it has been talked about in the form of as if it is in service to the face-to-face system. I wonder if I make myself clear. I will repeat again. Face-to-face or distance are simply methods of imparting education. Inherently, there is nothing either good or bad with one of them. But traditionally in our country, there has been an attitude of not really seeing distance education to be at par with face-to-face education. And that stance is visible even in the policy. Because, for example, I take that I'm talking when I'm with reference to the paragraph on teacher education, where it says that teacher education institutions offering face-to-face B.Ed may also offer online or open and distance learning programs. Now, online or open and distance learning programs have their own pedagogy. If we are talking that blended mode is what we need, some bit of face-to-face and some bit of open and distance or online, then really one is no better than the other. And that sort of an understanding needs to come up. Why I'm saying that? Because many of the people who are in service today, they are not going to be able to leave their jobs to be able to acquire a qualification. And if they complete their courses through an open and distance learning mode, then we should really not have a reservation about their competencies, which tends to take place. And here I'm really reminded about, once when I was in my own university, we had a convocation address by the president of the Commonwealth of Learning, Professor John Daniel. And he gave the example of the UK Open University. He said that the UK Open University offers a course in engineering. And the engineering course got a rating of 24 by 24 by their rating association, whereas a face-to-face training course in engineering got a rating of 23 on 24. So the point to say is about that the medium should not become the point where we sort of discriminate between people or between people who have used a particular medium to acquire qualification. That explicit acknowledgement of the ODL system, I find while the audience system has been mentioned at quite a few places, it is as if it was in service of the face-to-face system rather than a competent system in its own right. Because both the systems have their problems. If the face-to-face system didn't have its problems, we won't be talking about poor learning outcomes of children or the need to train teachers. So we need to appreciate that a variety of methods can be used for teacher education. And so long as the inputs are at par, inputs in the teacher education program are at par, the various methods and the pass outs from those methods should be considered at par. This wasn't explicitly raised, but I thought that I would just mention.
Shivani, can I ask a question?
Just a second, sir. If you can wait, because Shraddha from Pune had a hand raised.
Okay.
Shraddha?
Somebody is still getting the background noise.
Shraddha ma'am, you can unmute yourself.
Has the audio been clear, however?
Sir, Murli sir, I think it's better if you go ahead, because I think Shraddha ma'am isn't here or she's not able to connect.
Oh, okay, yeah. Professor Rekha, thanks for this, very beautiful presentation of the ECCE and the framework behind that. I am Dr. Murli. I work in the School of Education of TISS Hyderabad. I have a small doubt in relation to the way in which ECCE is visualized in relation to Anganwadis. Apart from locating Anganwadi, ECCE in Anganwadis in relation to the socio-economically disadvantaged groups residing in villages and small hamlets where the Anganwadis are working, even though there is no primary school. So Anganwadis therefore are given rightfully this responsibility to introduce ECCE there. But I myself, as a school student until my +2, I went to Anganwadis because my family member is Anganwadi teacher or a worker. So I myself kind of engaged with the school and children. So therefore I know how Anganwadis work. So largely these teachers go from small town to villages by taking the public transport, and the local person is Aya, who is there from the village, who actually cooks and feeds the children. And the children are brought by either their grandmother or mother or an older sibling. So if this is the way in which, and then they take the food or whatever that is given there, which is for nutrition component, and then they sit there for some time and leave. And these buildings are all rented buildings in small villages. And it is, as you said, it is like a 10 by 12 foot room as part of a slightly bigger house. So in this kind of environment, what the policy is envisaging to teach them literacy, numeracy, art, etc. In what way this is going to be materialized in terms of actually practically implementing? And there is no assurance or guarantee for building, giving a constructed permanent building for Anganwadis in villages. So in this given scenario, how do you think, somebody who is working in this field, how do you see the commitment of the government to the ECCE in the rural areas?
Why in the rural areas? I mean, Anganwadis are there even in urban slums. And perhaps in rural areas, children may be a bit better off as compared to the urban slums because you have more space, etc. But I totally agree with what you are saying, and that's exactly what I have been saying. Over the years, there are studies which have brought out that preschool education is the most affected service delivery of the Anganwadi. It receives the lowest priority. That's why when the earlier draft came out, as Alliance for the Right to Early Childhood Development, and the Alliance has many people who are professionals in this sector, we proposed the dominant model of locating the preschool within the school system. And however, because it may not be possible in every place for the pre-primary school to be there, as a secondary model, we do propose that, okay, let the Anganwadi be there wherever it's not possible. So I agree with you, and that's what I'm saying, that the equity issue remains largely unanswered in the policy, because the four models which have been articulated, which are what is happening at present, have differences in terms of space, trained teachers, the time on the teacher or the worker's hand to do preschool education. So that's why perhaps even if the location of the Anganwadi may not be a problem, the preschool education can continue to be provided in the Anganwadi with proper physical infrastructure if there is a second Anganwadi worker specifically dedicated. Over the years in the sector, we have made this suggestion, but it has really not ever found merit in any of the documents.
Yeah, because the teacher's job seems to be more or less maintaining the record for the nutrition component, and the IA's responsibility seem to be just, engaging the children for time being. So apart from that, I mean, if that reality is taken into consideration, I think much more should have come out in relation to what goes into building these Anganwadis for a qualitative input and, establishing them properly.
You're absolutely right. That whole conceptualization is missing. That's what I'm saying. Whereas on the one hand, you are envisaging a 4-year teacher training course, you are mentioning that for the Anganwadi, it would be a 6-month and a 1-year training. Okay, but even if they had mentioned, on what basis will the new Anganwadi worker be recruited? If she would have some preschool education diploma, one could see some hope. Fine, you have to train the existing people, and find whichever ways and means we use, we train. But it is assumed that if the Anganwadi system continues, the present ways of recruitment would continue. Nothing has been articulated on that, which is what I'm saying, that the amount of thought that has gone into describing the other levels of education, the same level of thought has not come in for early childhood education.
Yeah. Thank you.
There is somebody asking, Prachi, the policy mentions the responsibility of ACC curriculum and pedagogy will be with MHRD. What implications will this have in terms of regulation and management of ACC institutions, especially when we are talking about integrating them with the school system? Shouldn't, in that case, the responsibility of ECC curricula be more decentralized for better transition to the primary schools? So from what I understand in terms of curricular framework, it is the NCERT which lays out the curriculum for any stage of preschool, for any stage of education. And it is the states which adapt it. So I don't really know what happens for the other levels of education. But as I mentioned, that already a lot of work has gone into the states, women and child development departments, in defining curricula which is local and contextually appropriate. This curricula should be adopted. Convergence needs to be made between the women and child departments and the MHRD. It doesn't matter if the MHRD is overseeing. How does it matter? Somebody has to oversee. But the point is that how do you oversee? Are you going to oversee with convergence, or are you going to, we are going to start everything afresh? That is the whole point. And hopefully that if convergence can be established, that would be the more appropriate thing, because as I'm saying, at the ground level, you are doing the work. It doesn't matter whether now you come under this department or this department. That work has been done. Make use of the work. Put in appropriate monitoring mechanisms. The problem with co-locating Anganwadi in the primary schools has also to do with the monitoring mechanisms over there. So there are a lot of challenges. I think Rajasthan has already located many Anganwadis in the primary school. There are once again both pluses and minuses to it. So this whole thing has to be approached at a much more decentralized and local level, keeping parity intact. To me, it seems that all of the things will happen, but parity, I fear, will be compromised. That is my main concern. All of this thing may happen, but parity may get compromised.
There was a hand raised from Rashmi Srivastava. Rashmi ma'am, you can please unmute yourself.
I'm Rashmi Srivastava. Hello, Rekha ma'am.
Hello.
I am from Uttarakhand, and like you said about the Anganwadi thing, here I have visited few Anganwadis, and first and foremost, they are not approachable, and secondly, the teachers and the ayahs who are there, they themselves are not aware about the hygiene. That's the basic at ECC level. So how does the government address this issue? Because that's the formative year, and that is a time when children learn and imbibe these habits in their life. So basic hygiene, health, everything is missing in most of the Anganwadis, and they are in a pathetic state. So how does the government addresses this?
Yeah, I mean, if the so I think in many places now there are norms of increased money for rent. As I said, in Chhattisgarh, I have seen buildings have been constructed afresh for the entire Anganwadis. And so really it probably depends upon state to state. It would be wrong in any case to give an overarching, nationwide comment. You could give it in a very, very broad way. But to generalize that all would be like that, that would not be correct. But your point about hygiene, I would say that when the Anganwadi doesn't have its own building, when it doesn't have toilet facility, when it doesn't have running water, obviously the hygiene is going to be compromised. So when there is now provision since 2013 or 14, the rent has increased, or there is provision for making your own buildings, which from what I know little, I only know of one example of Chhattisgarh government, because they painted those buildings in yellow and they were there for all to see. It really depends upon the state governments to utilize those provisions and to do something further about it. And if it hasn't been done, perhaps they have their reasons, but it is not in the interest of the child.
Yeah, that's what I feel, because so believe me, the situations out here, what I've seen out here, they're not dark and dingy, and plus they're not approachable. So, and in a very remote place, which is difficult for the child to commute. So
and you are saying that the primary schools are better.
No, even the primary schools are no good. Believe
so
me. No, even the primary schools are no good, and the problem is that I was in one of the schools which is a private school, and I left that private school because I felt the building, the premises was not safe for the children.
Yeah.
Right. So when I approached the authorities, they told me कि यहाँ पे ऐसा ही होता है.
That's what I'm trying to also say, that we should not conclude our talk on the note of Anganwadi bashing, because it's really not okay. The ECC provision across the country, across the three types of service provision, whether it is government, whether it is private school, or whether it is Anganwadi, it has its own problems, though in a different way. So there are only very few percentage where children are getting the ECC that they ought to. So it should not become a session where we continuously criticize a particular service provision, because the others are also better. The government schools may be better in terms of place, a separate toilet, and all of that, but something else is lacking over there. So what we need to see is that whatever commitment we are making for early childhood education, in whatever whatever is the main outreach service delivery that we are providing, it needs to have those standards. And out of all the three types of service provision, in terms of space, Anganwadis appear to be the most compromised. In terms of teacher qualification, Anganwadis appear to be the most compromised, but that is not to say that that is the case all over, which is why can we look at it in a more decentralized way? I do not know how much of that decentralized planning is possible, but that is what I feel ideally needs to be done.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, there's a question in chat from Jayashree Mukherjee. It reads, is there a mention of parents' role and parents' awareness in ECC?
Yeah, so just one line, only one line. It says on, it's in the very first, I've sort of lost my page number 7, so I can't see. Yeah, here it is. So 1.3, there is just that line that the curricular framework will be made for the 0 to 3, and the framework will serve as a guide both for parents and for early childhood care education institutions. So just that. Actually, the nurturing care framework for under 3s, it's very explicit: health and safety, protection, responsive parenting, all of that. And parents are actually the main people. This nurturing care framework, or whatever framework we make for the under 3s, this would be for the parents. It would be for the parent education. How we plan to do it, it has not been articulated. And if we take the limited stand that, education is about education in the four walls of the schools, then we would once again be losing out on those critical early years of birth to 3, where you all would have seen that graph, where so many competencies of sensory development, language development, and socio-emotional development are at their peak at the age of, before 3. And most parents do not know what to do with their child. In fact, often when you begin a program and you just ask, even with the teachers, if you ask them, you can try it out next time with your group, with a group of teachers, even highly trained teachers. It's a bit of a thing that I'm sending you as a challenge. Just ask them, आपको क्या लगता है बच्चा कब से सोचना शुरू करता है? Just ask this question, and you will find the responses vary from 1 year to 2 years to 3 years. So we are not even thinking that the child, people are not even thinking that the child thinks before the child speaks or before the child goes to the school. So there is really no mention of how, on a massive scale, we need to take up parent education and how this would be done. This is the gap area in the policy. Somebody is repeatedly asking about the MPhil program. So I must say I'm really not too gelled up on that to answer. I myself didn't go through an MPhil program. We had a direct PhD, but we had a dissertation at our master's level. So if your concern is that the MPhil sort of trains you to take up a dissertation at the later level in the PhD, I would agree. But really beyond that, I really don't know too much about that. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so Shivani said I'm really not competent to answer that.
Can I just comment, Shivani, for a minute? If there are other questions, then I'll hold on. Rekha, just to go back to your earlier reference to the tension between the schoolification of this early childhood, these early levels of care and education for the child. And so is there, which means that we see formal education, formal schooling system as the only mode by which a child can be taught and something can be learned. If there is that emphasis and one feels uncomfortable about it, I just wanted to ask if you have any other models in mind where one can ensure that across different sections where, I mean, modern schooling is the only way to go. So in such a context, can we still think of alternative ways by which there is school preparedness for a child?
Activity-based learning approach has been tried out in Chennai or even in Karnataka. They're even doing now something like, called Chilli Pilli. So those models, I think, do serve well. I think the activity-based learning approach, which was adopted in Chennai, I think in the last decade or so, it was documented and researched also. But somehow, I do not know why these models take off, but then do not really find place at the national level. But I would say that within the foundational years, the 3 to 8 years, would be best served if we do not rigorously classify them as, you know, LKG, UKG 1 and 2. If it remains as an activity level where children can progress at their own pace, then even this whole thing, you know, which we are lamenting just now, that entry to class 1 is at 5 plus and 6 plus, that difference won't remain, because you will be seeing the outcome at the end of the foundational stage, not necessarily as class 1 or class 2. So if that flexibility, if the curriculum in the foundational stage, the line is very lovely, which the framework says. It says multifaceted, multi-level, play-based and activity-based. But to operationalize this, you do not have to put children into neat boxes of class 1 and class 2. Experiments have been done. How far they can be sort of done on a bigger scale probably remains on, you know, how much initiative we want to put into teacher training in that way. It requires teacher training, it requires setting up of the classroom, it requires a whole environment change. So nothing like that has been explicitly mentioned in the NEP. There is no mention. Multi-level, multi-that is there, but it's not been a strategy has not been explicitly mentioned.
Compared to the previous policy, at least there is then a thinking in terms of the stages. So you are clubbing together three to so it's still the second level, but of course the classes remain. I suppose there's a broad classification, but the specific levels and age levels and the class, that has not changed much.
Yeah, and it is this class level etc. only which will cause the schoolification. Because the teacher in class 1 will say ABC नहीं पहचानता है, मैं क्या करूं? तो जब आप ABC नहीं पहचानता है पे करेंगे तो फिर ABC वाला ही पढ़ाएंगे हम प्री स्कूल में. Because I do not know how fast the teacher education into the new training, new education for early literacy and numeracy, how fast it will keep pace. So I would say, if I would say one thing which can magically change everything, I mean, this is just me saying, it's about, I could be very flawed also on this, but I think a magical thing which could change everything is making teachers understand what truly is meant by early literacy and early numeracy. At least it changed me 10 years ago. So I'm saying on that basis. So I really don't, it's my very personal opinion, but I think it makes or breaks the early years education.
And there's a question from our co-host Rohini. Rohini, can you please unmute yourself?
Hello, ma'am. My question was like, there are few children whose development is a bit slow, like they're not able to, maybe the speech does not develop at an early age, and maybe sometimes even the motor skills do not develop. So with assessments in place, like how do these children cope up, and then is there anything that is a mention in the ECC, and how do Anganwadi workers or helpers or teachers would contribute to these problems?
So there is this whole concept of the RPSK, Rashtriya. I do not know the full. I cannot immediately recall the full form, but the RPSK initiative. There are these multidisciplinary teams of health professionals and special educators which are supposed to be available at the district level. And actually one of the roles of the Anganwadi worker is for early identification. But once again, early identification of disability even now in our country is not early enough. And in fact, one of the proposals also is this, that if or rather one of the thinkings is this, that if the preschool education component squarely goes within the school system, then the Anganwadi worker has more time to spend with the under threes and for early identification of disability before the age of 3, which is actually very, very critical for helping the child to achieve his or her optimal development. So as of now, there are schemes But to what extent these schemes actually reach the child at the rural level or even at the urban slum level, also with the stigma attached about parents not realizing. That is why, therefore, the screening is important, which is supposed to take place through the Anganwadi level. But how much of that is able to take place in the present context is not a very positive sign.
Thank you, ma'am.
There was a hand raise from Rashmi ma'am. Please ask your question.
Somebody said Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram. Yeah, that's the one. And with this, multidisciplinary health teams are supposed to be available at PHCs. And they are supposed to be, the ANM and the ASHA are supposed to be tracking children's development and identifying children with disabilities. To what extent that is a success, what I find at different places. I mean, one way to gauge success is that, I was just a part of a study of in the urban in the urban slums of Delhi and Mumbai. So not that our sample size was too much, but whatever it was, only in one of the facility, we studied Anganwadis, we studied government facilities and also private schools. Only in one school did we find a child with disability. So I think that shows that either there is no early identification or there is a stigma, the child has not been allowed entry, or the parent has not wanted to uh, sort of bring it out into the public that I have a child with disability. So a long, long way to go, and really from whatever I can think of my visits all through my, in the past years, very rarely does one come across a child with disability in the early childhood care and education setup.
Ma'am, I feel it's Rashmi here, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I feel that you said that instead of dividing the classes, junior KG, senior KG, class 1 and 2, if we can have, I personally feel if we have hands-on experience and activity-based where there are no notebooks as such, probably that might help a lot, because right now training the teachers and orienting the parents will take a long way. But in case if the government proposes this, that we get away with the books and we only they give us some proposal is there regarding the activities, probably that might really go a long way. So initially, and meantime we can train the teachers.
Personal opinion, the class 1 textbook of Hindi and English of the NCERT is pretty difficult. Though there are supposed to be notes on how the teacher has to transact that particular book, but still it is pretty difficult.
Okay.
So you have a point in making everything activity based. You have a point there. What you're saying is that if we change the curricula at least or make it more activity oriented, then the teachers would perforce have to transact it in an activity oriented.
Yes,
that's what
so
you're
at
saying.
least, because I feel that training the teachers will take the numbers are so huge that it will take, I think, years and years to orient them and to bring. But till then, because this policy has been enforced, so if we give them that, okay, this is the activity, the children have to do it. I'm sure it is going to benefit the children.
That's a very viable idea.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's already been about 1 hour of discussion, so I think we'll have our last question. Ritesh raised his hand. So can you please ask your question?
I was thinking that I'm taking 2 turns to ask the question, so I would ask it to be passed on to somebody else. Thank you, Shivani.
Thank you, sir. Neeti, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello. Am I audible? Yeah. So, ma'am, what I feel is like as per the new policy, if we go by the section of ECCE, so there is somehow new market for private publishers as such because they are coming with the new concept of home schools and things like that. Where they are saying that we will, look after school readiness for children and we will prepare them, with the help of parents, we will prepare them. So somehow I feel like NCRT is not taking any such initiative. Like there are several channels of NCRT through which they approach, I would say, like school school children through their programs, live sessions, and all that. Is this something which NCRT will also look at to for children? Because I feel like it's not it's the private publishing, and that fees is not accessible for everyone in the country, to pay that much of fees and afford for their homeschooling and concepts like that. So NCRT will like, or any other government agency will look forward for ensuring ECCE for children, marginalized children especially. So is there any component which addresses this thing?
Private publishers can do what they want, in the sense that you don't really need any school. If you're doing a play-based ECC curriculum, you don't really need any other set of school readiness activities anywhere. A typical ECC curriculum prepares you, helps you to be school ready. The private publishers, or all that sector feeds on parental anxiety. It feeds on parental anxiety also of where there is a whole sense of where you want to accelerate learning. So it is once again a matter of parent education to understand that if their child is attending a ECC school where a typical ECC curriculum is being done, there is really no need for any additional school readiness activities and for them to spend huge packages on that. So it is also a matter of everybody understanding what is ECCE. Banning the private publishers to do that, I mean, I really don't know how much that is possible. Maybe I didn't get your question correctly, but all I would like to say is that you do not need any other special tutoring to be school ready. If you are
Ma'am,
getting
just the thing is, like, somehow I feel like with this some like privatization, which particular to this stage has increased, because I am also engaged in homeschool in this publication. So I see like parents are more inclined towards this and they are enrolling their children. And past we started with this project in in July, and by August we had more than 100 enrollments at once. So I feel like parents are, but it is something which is not accessible for everyone. So is there any plan by the side of government to ensure something like this? So that is what I
So
want.
what you need to ensure is just deliver a proper ECC curriculum in a proper way. If that would be done, then you don't have to access the things that you are saying. But I'm also saying that the parents who are accessing your things are also the parents who are probably getting good quality ECE in any case in a good preschool. They are simply over anxious. So the parent who can afford you is already probably sending his child to a good place. That's what I can say about it. And the government's responsibility, from what you are saying, is to offer an appropriate ECC curriculum in the public system through whichever channels which are appropriate, Anganwadis or private or preschools or pre-primary sections in preschools. So once that is in place, you don't really need any other additional academic readiness at all. A good preschool curriculum brings academic readiness with itself.
Ma'am, if we can take a few more questions. One is from Sardar Simran Singh. Please ask your question.
Ma'am, how do we implement the ECC in ashrams, ashram sala?
I forgot to mention that. So I'm also not clear. Let me say, not only me, our entire sector is not clear why the ashram shalas have found a special mention. if the idea is that children in difficult circumstances, uh, we need to provide, like ashram shalas are for, I mean, if I understand correctly, they are for tribal children, isn't it? And typically they provide primary school and above. So, if we are saying that children in difficult circumstances need to be provided ECC, that's a very good thing. But then there are children in difficult circumstances in many other contexts. For example, children with their mothers in prisons, children in institutions, children, chronically ill children in hospitals. So we haven't made a mention of them, not even in the SEDGs. We have not made a mention of them. So why the ashram shala has been specifically mentioned? I mean, are we wanting to say that in the tribal communities, the ECCE is not being able to be reached to children, and so these children should be brought to the ashram shalas and they should be provided ECC there? Uh, well, I would still say that it is much better for the child to remain within the family. If in the tribal dominated areas ECC is not reaching to the child near the family location, then that is what we need to do, rather than bring children to an institutional setting to provide ECCE, because children are best cared for in their family setting. And yet, on the other hand, what I'm also saying is that if we are thinking of children here, then we need to also think, we have not made a mention of children in difficult circumstances who, because of other reasons, are in institutions because they don't have families. Those that mention has not been there. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm right. That's my understanding of ashram shalas. If I'm wrong about my understanding of ashram shalas, I stand corrected.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Ask a question. Hello, Ritesh sir, you can ask your question.
Yes, thanks, Shivani. Thanks for keeping me in mind. So, Rekha, my question relates to this differentiation in terms of the early childhood years, particularly in the urban settings and the rural settings. In urban settings, we have a proliferation of private partners involved in setting up preparatory schools and also bringing in their own curricular structural imagination, which was many a times unregulated, right? So is there a way of reconciling this kind of a proliferation through this framework? So has there been some, so my question relates to, has there been some initiation into this framework for early childhood care, and are there some kind of groups which have been mobilized to engage with this kind of an engagement of developing frameworks?
Or to curb the commercialization, you are saying?
Yes, yes.
Not really, at least not that I know. See, we as Alliance for the Right to Early Childhood Development, we sort of work with the RTE, and in many cases we look up to the RTE, to take up some of the related causes. So I think the RT Forum is pretty active on this aspect, and so we haven't really very much concentrated very much how to regulate the commercialization, except to say that we say that accreditation, monitoring and regulation must come in, and those standards must be devised specifically for ECCE, and they must be applicable to both the private and the government sector. And in fact, prior to about last year, 4 states were actually in the process of developing their early childhood accreditation and regulation framework also. In fact, Himachal announced it also. So in that sense, you can see that probably the Himachal government has been proactive in curbing commercialization. It is not a direct effect of, it is not a direct intervention by the alliance, but yes, participation or mutual interactions had sensitized a particular cadre of the government in the Himachal Pradesh government, and they did come up with this thing where they regulated the private schools. But once again, as alliance, our problem was that they didn't regulate the Anganwadi sector, by which we mean that the norms of curricular processes, they should be applicable even for the Anganwadi sector. But nothing was mentioned about that. And then we knew that Karnataka government, or maybe the Maharashtra government, I think I'm wrong, maybe the Karnataka government was in the process, and Maharashtra government did bring out, I think, some norms, and Delhi government was in the process. But because of the government change and all these elections, a lot of this process of bringing in regulation and standards has sort of, I think, come to a halt. But 4 states, in terms of 4 state governments, I know were engaged in Maharashtra, Delhi, and Himachal Pradesh, which brought it out also. Right now, I think I'm not aware if anything is going on right now, very actively right now, but things were moving about a year ago.
Thank you.
We have this last question from chat, that is there any mention of life skills? This can be developed with collaborative learning. Is there a specific mention of pedagogical practices in ECC? From Jayesh.
Not really in the sense of pedagogical practices, so hardly anything has been talked about now. There has been a listing of methods and materials, yeah. But about life skills, there is this distinct line which talks about developing social capacities, sensitivities, behavior, personal and public cleanliness, teamwork and cooperation. So in that sense, it is there. But in terms of pedagogy, there is only that overarching, very beautiful line of multifaceted, multi-level, play-based and activity-based learning. But apart from that, there is no very specific mention of life skills, though there is this whole aspect of development of social skills. But I think, the very next paragraph, the very next sentence, which says that the overall aim of ECCE is to attain optimal outcomes in the various domains. In the ECC context, we talk within a developmental domains framework. So if the physical and motor, socio-emotional, cognitive, language. So if you take that broad view, there is a talk about it. But probably the explication of that has been done for the later years of childhood, in the later years of schooling, sorry. Those things have, I think, probably come up much later. Over here in this one paragraph, almost everything has been put together, whereas it could have been articulated in a more theoretically sound way in terms of goals, pedagogies, methods and materials, and the goals could have included concepts, skills and abilities. That sort of a ladder-like or a framework-type articulation is not here. You sort of need to cull out the various aspects that are there in that para number 1.2. So, I think I have discovered the cause, if it is that, the cause of the background noise. I think because the AC is not on, my computer is running its fan. And I think perhaps the background noise that you're getting is the whirring sound of my desktop's internal fan. That could be it. And I'm really so sorry to have discovered it towards the end. Otherwise, maybe I would have put on the AC, because when we talked about the noise, I'm sitting in quite a bit of heat with no AC and no fan, thinking that that's what's causing the noise. But now I understand it's probably the internal fan of my desktop which is running and probably causing the noise. So sorry about that. I hope you didn't have to strain too much to hear me, and it was not a problem.
Ma'am, we managed quite well, I guess, because people did not complain after, since 1 hour, I did not hear any complaints.
Maybe they're reconciled now. Nothing can be done about it. So I'm really sorry. I mean, it's a lesson for me. it's a lesson for me. I actually usually never sit without the AC, but because this thing came up, I didn't even switch it on. I got so scared and I didn't switch on the AC, thinking that that will also add to the noise. But probably had I done my usual stuff and switched the AC on, the computer would have been cool and the fan wouldn't have run. I'm so sorry about that.
So, ma'am, it was a wonderful discussion. And on behalf of TISS Azim Premji School of Education, I would want to extend our heartfelt gratitude for such an honest, robust, and fruitful discussion. I think we all learned a lot. And I'm also grateful to the wonderful participants and such amazing questions that you brought forth. And I also thank Dr. Rekha Pappu, our teacher who helped us organize these wonderful conversations, and all the members of the team. And lastly, we have a small request. If each of us can turn on our videos, we can take a picture for our memory.
Yeah.
The good thing about Zoom is it allows you to change the screen and capture everyone. Google Meet doesn't let you do that. You can only capture the 12 faces which are there, not everyone. So that's a very good thing about the Zoom.
It is.
Now's your moment, Shivani. A few more. Yeah.
Yukta, have you taken the picture?
Great to see everyone. No, everybody has not put on the videos. There's still many people who haven't put on the video.
Yes, I'm waiting for everyone to turn on their video.
You can go ahead, Yukta. You'll get the names now. Some faces and some names.
Yes, ma'am.
You'll get the name.
Right.
Every time people may not want to put on their videos.
Okay, thank you. I got the pictures.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the honor. It was really lovely. I didn't feel that I was talking. It was really a conversation. It's a great idea and I really thoroughly enjoyed, and I was reminded of being in the Hyderabad campus, Rekha. That was, I think, what, a year ago?
Long time ago. You should come again. I hope we open and then our students can meet with you face to face.
Very vibrant group of people.
Endorsement of distance learning, which I've learned a lot about that approach as well. But yes.
Very vibrant group. I mean, everybody had read up on the necessary section of the policy. They had chewed it, they had digested it, and really very penetrating questions. I really enjoyed, and I also became richer by the questioning and by the perspectives you all have put it. I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for getting us started. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So I'll end the meeting now, and thank you all to all who participated and came in. As Shivani mentioned earlier, this is a weekly webinar on NEP this month and the next. So we'll get back to you about the next one in this series. Thank you all.
Bye. I'll leave with your permission.
Yes, thanks.